A very good morning to all of you. This is essentially an urban century that we are living in. The United Nations forecasts say that by 2030, 70% of the people in the world would be living in urban cities. Historically, urbanization has propelled the advancement of several national economies and has led to a very vast segment of our population being lifted above the poverty line. But urbanization is also accompanied by a very vast consumption of natural resources. And actually, in reality, cities account for just 3% of the Earth's land mass. They house about 50% of the human population. They produce about 75% of the world's resources, but they emit about 2/3 of the CO2 emissions. And therefore, if the developing world, countries like India, were to adopt the strategy of the Western world and follow the same strategy of growth, we would require 4 planet Earth to house the human beings in this world. And therefore, we have only one planet Earth, and alas, we need a totally different strategy of growth. You need creativity, you need innovation, you need sustainability, and above all, you need very creative ideas for urbanization. Now, India is passing through a very unprecedented scale of urbanization. The latest study by McKinsey shows that by 2030, 350 million Indians will get into the urbanization process. And by 2050, 700 million additional Indians will get into the urbanization process. Now, this is 2.5 times the present population of the United States of America. And in reality, this means that whether we like it or not, every minute, 30 Indians are moving from rural areas to urban areas. And therefore, all this is happening when India is passing through a window of demographic transition which rarely ever happens in history. You know, your 72% of your population will be below the age of 35. And you need to provide skills, you need to provide jobs. And one of the worst things that can happen is when you have a young population without skills. And therefore, a leading thinker like C.K. Prahalad, the late C.K. Prahalad, said that actually India needs to create 500 new cities by the time it becomes 75 in the year 2022. Otherwise, every single existing city in India will become a living slum. And therefore, urbanization, whether we like it or not, is on our doorsteps, and urbanization is inevitable. Now, we must understand that cities are centers of growth, they are centers of innovation, they are centers of creativity. And much like the 19th century was a century of empires and 20th century was a century of nation states, the 21st century is a century of cities. And in the coming era, in the coming period, it will be cities which will compete for investments, they will compete for innovation, they will compete for growth. It will not be countries, it will be cities which will compete. And that's why in India, you have Mumbai, whose GDP, the GDP of Mumbai city is larger than the GDP of 26 states of India. And when cities are centers of growth, innovation, and modernity and innovation, it's very important to realize that India must grow on the back of manufacturing. And many of these cities will be industrial cities because if India has to grow at rates of 8-9%, India must create new jobs in the manufacturing sector. But when you do manufacturing, and let me tell you, historically, no country in the world has grown on the back of agriculture post-World War II. Whether you look at Japan, whether you look at Korea, Taiwan, China, all have grown on the back of manufacturing. They created jobs. But a logical consequence of manufacturing and the spatial manifestation of manufacturing is the movement of vast segments of our population, of workforce, of young managers, their wives, their children into urban cities. And therefore, a logical consequence of this is to really plan in a scientific manner for both manufacturing as well as the social infrastructure which accompanies it. Ladies and gentlemen, India has been a very reluctant urbanizer. India has been a very reluctant urbanizer because of our belief in our founding father. And that belief was that Indian villages will be viable, they'll be economically self-independent, and therefore they will be commercially self-sustaining entities. This was very much the belief of China, and China's revolutionary movement was a peasantry-led revolution. Until the 70s, China believed, but in 72 it broke away from this philosophy, and it said, we are going to drive China through manufacturing. And in the next 30 years, they grew at rates of 10% per annum over the next 3 decades. And the young mayors of China created many cities. And therefore, this growth was inevitable if you want to go up this path. And therefore, to my mind, as we go along, we realize that urbanization is taking place. And one of the big things that's happening in India is, one of the big ticket things that's happening in India is that today, all goods produced in the northern part of India have to travel to the western parts of India by passenger trains and by lorries. And it takes about 14 days. So goods produced in all the northern states take about 14 days. But there will be a container train which will connect Dadri in UP, close to Delhi, to the JNPT port. And all goods in 2017 will be put within 12 to 13 hours into the ports on the western coast of India. Container train running at high speed, double stacking, triple stacking, just taking containers, no passenger. Now, in 12 hours, you're putting goods, and that, to my mind, is a revolutionary change. But one of the big things that happens is that it opens a completely new route of India, which opens India to a possibility of new manufacturing, new urbanization, creation of new cities. And therefore, the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor has planned out 7 new cities on this and tried to link it on either sides of both the corridor, of the dedicated freight corridor, and to the passenger trains, etc. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when cities were created across America, when they were created across Europe, land, gas, and water were very cheaply available. And therefore, they created sprawling cities. You could live in New Jersey, travel to Manhattan 2 hours. Gas was cheaply available, so cars were not a problem. And actually, American car companies brought over the railway companies and destroyed them so that cars could sell. But these are land, gas, and water are very scarce commodities in today's world. It's a very different world. And therefore, today's cities have to be planned in a very different manner. And today's cities, to our mind, have to be based around public transportation systems. And public transportation system of these cities will hold the key. And to our mind, there are 2 critical issues. One is the backbone must be based on public transportation and mass transportation. The transit system and the transit-oriented development holds the key to the success of any new city. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, to our mind, technology holds the key. When cities were created across the western part of the world, since these commodities were easily available, they created verticals. They created a power vertical, they created a water vertical, they created a safety vertical. But there's been a huge change. There's been a revolutionary change in terms of digital technology. And digital technology has enabled the world to do urbanization using technology and to really, instead of verticals, do horizontal development. You can manage the new cities with the use of technology. And therefore, today's cities not only have to be interconnected, not only have to be transit-oriented, they not only have to be walkable and cyclable cities, they have to be the smart cities of the future. Now, while India has been a very reluctant urbanizer, this has very severe advantages. And India can actually use these advantages to make a big quantum jump in terms of using smart technologies of the future. This is what, when IBM talks about the smart city concept, or Cisco talks about the smart and connected cities, or what the Koreans are talking about as the ubiquitous cities, this is what they mean, that you can drive urbanization on the back of your mobile telephone. And this is what they've done. They've managed entire cities on the back of a single mobile telephone. You can get access, manage power, manage grids, manage water, manage in public information, manage public safety, all on the back of a one ubiquitous device, and that's the mobile telephony. And to our mind, India must use this technology to be the key driver of growth in the coming years, and India must set the model in terms of driving urbanization through technology. So one is, if you were to look at the space requirement for various transport modes, you realize that the worst thing we can do is to create cities for cars. The best thing we can do is to create cities on the back of transit-oriented development and cities which are cyclable and walkable. The second key thing, to my mind, is to use technology to make a big jump forward. So what the Delhi-Mumbai corridor really does is opens the possibility, and what we've done is to use some of the best master planners from across the world. From their learning lessons, plan for new cities. Plan for cities which are transit-oriented, plan for cities which are compact, which are vertical, which are dense. And this is a very important point. You can do today dense cities, you can do vertical cities based on the transport nodes. Close to the transport nodes, you must recycle water about 100%, you must recycle garbage. And there are huge examples of this, and most of these examples come from the Asian part of the world. A city like Kitakyushu in Japan, which became one of the most powerful cities in terms of industrial power, was the most polluting cities in 1970s, and Made of Japan took this as a challenge, and you go to Kitakyushu, everything is recycled today. Everything, every single item is recycled. Singapore is a great example of recycling almost 100% of its water using rainwater. A city like Yokohama saved about 38% of its waste garbage, saved about almost $2 billion worth of dollars on city management, simply on the better management of its waste. So the examples are all available from the Asian part of the world and not the Western part of the world, ladies and gentlemen. And it's very important that India must evolve its own model of urbanization using both technology and a completely new process of urbanization. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's not the brick and mortar. It's not the brick and mortar of a city which makes a city. What makes the city is its soul. What makes a city is its people. What makes a city is its art, culture. What defines a city is atmospherics, which is derived from the people of that city. And I go back to this 13th century poet, this great Indian poet, one of the great creative legends of that era. His ancestry, he wrote in Persian. He wrote in Persian. He was a Muslim. He wrote in Persian language. His ancestry was Turkic. But he considered himself to be the greatest man alive on earth. He's to have been born in India. And he said, I'm the luckiest man alive to have India as my motherland. And of Delhi of the 13th century then, and speaking on Delhi, he said what a vibrant city it was. And to quote him, he said, how exhilarating is the atmosphere of India. There cannot be a better teacher than the way of life of its people. If any foreigner comes by, he will have to ask for nothing because they treat him as their own, play an excellent host and win his heart, and show him how to smile like a flower. That was Amir Khusro in 13th century, relevant then and relevant now, ladies and gentlemen, for the city. Cities are made by the people, cities are made by art and music, cities are not merely brick and mortar, they are not about technology. They are about the softer elements of the city. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.